He had come to marry the senator's daughter. Everyone was dazzled by his smile, except one man. Justice of the peace noticed something odd about him right during the ceremony and stopped everything. Subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're from. The sunlight slanted in golden streaks through the high-arched windows of the Charleston County Courthouse, spilling across polished wood and marble floors like blessings from the heavens. The air inside the grand old building held a quiet kind of reverence, as if the walls themselves were aware of the occasion taking place within them. Outside, the street buzzed with luxury sedans and black SUVs idling behind valet ropes. Uniformed doormen in white gloves opened car doors with crisp nods, welcoming South Carolina's elite into what the local papers had been calling the wedding of the year. Laughter rose like birdsong over the hum of strings from a nearby quartet. Photographers snapped their shutters in practiced bursts as guests arrived in waves of silk, satin, and tailored suits. Inside the courthouse's ceremonial chamber, refurbished from an old federal courtroom, everything was immaculate. Chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks overhead, casting soft light across rows of chairs draped in ivory fabric and tied with gold sashes. Bouquets of fresh white roses and baby's breath lined the aisle in crystal vases, while an arch of blush orchids framed the elevated platform where the ceremony would take place. The smell of expensive perfume mingled with the faintest trace of polished wood and antique varnish. At the center of this opulence stood Judge Albert Cain. He was a tall man, not quite imposing, but with a posture honed by decades in the courtroom. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and the fine lines on his face lent a gravitas that made people stand a little straighter when they spoke to him. Today, instead of his usual black robe, he wore a ceremonial, deep navy judicial mantle, trimmed with gold thread, a tribute to his final official act before retirement. It was fitting, perhaps poetic, that his last task as an officiant would be to unite the daughter of his oldest friend to the man she believed to be the love of her life. Emma Carter was the kind of woman who inspired admiration even in those who pretended not to be impressed. At 28, she'd already carved out a reputation as a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and a public speaker with a voice like calm water. She had the poise of someone who had been raised in the limelight, yet the warmth of someone who had never let it get to her head. People said she was beautiful, and she was, but it wasn't just the soft cascade of chestnut curls or her wide, intelligent hazel eyes. It was the way she looked at people when they spoke to her, as though nothing in the world mattered more than their words. Today, she looked like something out of a magazine. Her dress, a custom, off-shoulder gown with subtle lace embroidery and a flowing train, shimmered as she walked beneath the chandeliers. A cathedral-length veil trailed behind her, anchored to her head with a band of pearls. Her smile, soft, real, and unguarded, had already appeared on the front page of 3 morning newspapers. She greeted guests with a hug here, a laugh there, her eyes occasionally searching for the one person who made everything else fade into the background. Ryan Miller. He stood at the far end of the room, near the altar, hands loosely clasped in front of him. His tuxedo fit like it had been sculpted onto him, and the crisp white of his shirt glowed against the darker tones of his skin. His jawline was strong, his smile was easy, and his eyes held a gleam that could have been love, or confidence. Perhaps both. He carried himself with the kind of charm that didn't ask permission. It simply entered the room and waited to be acknowledged. To the hundreds of guests gathered that afternoon, Ryan was the perfect match for Emma. He was composed, soft-spoken, with just enough mystery about his past to be intriguing without raising questions. According to the official narrative, he was a decorated Army veteran turned tech entrepreneur with a green energy company poised to go public in 6 months. He had met Emma at a charity gala and swept her off her feet within a matter of weeks. It was a whirlwind romance, one that would have sent most high society mothers into a panic, but Ryan had impressed everyone, especially Senator James Carter. The father of the bride had once remarked, "That young man has a look of integrity." No one had argued, but Judge Cain had not built a lifetime in the courtroom without learning to read faces. And something about Ryan Miller's face, particularly today, made a small alarm bell ring somewhere deep in his chest. The judge had been watching him from the corner of his eye ever since the groom entered the chamber. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to others, but Cain noticed the way Ryan kept adjusting his cuffs, tugging slightly at the corners of his vest. He shifted his weight too often. His eyes scanned the crowd more than once, not in casual acknowledgement, but with a quick, anxious flickering. It wasn't the nervous excitement of a man about to marry the love of his life. It was something else. Tighter. Controlled. Still, the judge said nothing. His role today was ceremonial, not judicial. He reminded himself that he was not here to interrogate, to investigate, to question. He was here to bless a union, to send two people into the world together with hope and solemnity. And yet, that small bell, silent for years, continued to ring. As the orchestra shifted into a slower melody, the room hushed. The bridal procession began. Bridesmaids in flowing sage-green dresses glided down the aisle in pairs. Behind them, the flower girl, a niece from Emma's side, tossed delicate white petals with methodical delight. Then the double doors at the end of the hall opened again, and a collective intake of breath filled the room. There she was. Emma stood framed by the doorway, one hand on her father's arm, the other resting softly on the bouquet she held against her midsection. Her eyes scanned the crowd and settled on Ryan. Her face lit up with something radiant and private. Her father, Senator Carter, stood tall and proud beside her. Together, they began the slow walk down the aisle. Cain watched as Ryan's posture stiffened. He smiled, but it was a second too late, a fraction too wide. His eyes flicked to the doors again, just once, then back to Emma. Judge Cain, standing at the altar, felt the same unease crawl down his spine like a draft through an old window. He murmured a silent thought. May the truth always find the light, even when it hides in shadows. Emma and her father reached the altar. The senator handed his daughter over to the man she was about to marry, his voice caught somewhere between pride and hesitation. Ryan took her hands in his, whispered something that made her smile, and turned toward the judge. Cain opened his ceremonial binder, eyes tracing the words he'd delivered hundreds of times before. The speech was familiar, time-tested. It had comforted generations of couples. But today, the words felt heavy in his mouth. He cleared his throat and began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness and to celebrate the union of two souls. As the ceremony progressed, Cain's voice was calm and commanding, but his mind continued to wander. Details danced through his thoughts like stubborn motes of dust. Ryan's vague military history, the absence of his family, his reluctance to discuss his past, the inconsistency in how he described his upbringing. Cain had asked him once, during a brief conversation, what unit he served with. Ryan had smiled and said, "It's all a bit classified." A convenient answer, but a familiar one. There had been other signs, minor but cumulative. The way he hesitated when asked about Emma's mother, calling her Carol instead of May. The way he'd deflected when asked where he went to college. "All over," he'd said. "You know how life is." And now, as the final part of the ceremony approached, Cain could feel the weight of the next line pressing against his chest. "If any person here can show just cause why this couple may not lawfully be joined together in marriage." He glanced up. Ryan was looking directly at him now, eyes locked, smile frozen. Let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The room was silent. 3 seconds passed. 4. People began to smile again. Some chuckled softly. Emma's hand gently squeezed Ryan's. The moment had passed, or had it? Cain's heart thudded in his chest. A thought, uninvited and fierce, surged up from the back of his mind. This man isn't who he says he is. But it was too late now, or perhaps just barely early enough. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged, rings slid onto fingers, and lips met in a carefully timed kiss. Applause broke out across the chamber. People stood and cheered. Camera shutters clicked in rhythm. And yet, deep in the heart of the man who had just married them, Judge Albert Cain felt the whisper of something unresolved. A thread, a smudge, a crack beneath the gold leaf. He smiled. He congratulated. But his eyes never left the groom. Whatever was hiding behind that smile, Cain thought, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. And he would be ready. The echoes of applause were still fading when the reception began in earnest, spilling out onto the courthouse's expansive rear lawn, now transformed into a spectacle of luxury. White tents arched over linen-covered tables set with bone china and gold-trimmed crystal. Under soft strings of Edison lights and cascading garlands of flowers, guests gathered around open bars and oyster stations. Somewhere in the background, a jazz trio played a sultry rendition of At Last, and laughter rose like champagne bubbles over the hum of conversation. People toasted the newlyweds with sparkling rose, their smiles wide, their voices lifted in joy. To the world watching, it was a fairy tale. Emma floated among the guests like a vision of elegance and ease, accepting compliments with the grace of someone raised in public view, but never hardened by it. Her hand found Ryan's again and again, grounding her, reminding her that this moment was real. She was someone's wife now. It felt surreal, but in the best possible way. Ryan played his part well. He smiled with his arm around Emma's waist, laughed at the toasts, kissed her temple as if the rest of the world didn't exist. He accepted every handshake with confidence, remembered names with eerie precision, and thanked Emma's father twice for the opportunity to earn his trust. He was charming without being arrogant, warm without being cloying, and polished in a way that made the guests say, "What a catch," in whispers behind champagne flutes. And yet, Judge Albert Cain couldn't look away. He stood near the edge of the lawn, a bourbon in hand that had barely been touched, his eyes tracking Ryan like a hawk. Something in him refused to relax. It wasn't just the inconsistencies anymore. It was the way Ryan seemed rehearsed, like a man playing the role of a husband rather than being one. The judge watched the subtle but telling signs, the way Ryan's smile faded the moment he turned away from a camera, the way his fingers flexed when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes flicked toward exits more often than they lingered on Emma. Cain tried to dismiss it. He told himself he was just old, that his instincts were rusty, that the years of dealing with criminals, liars, and manipulators had left him suspicious of everyone. But deep down, he knew. He had seen that same look too many times, in witnesses who cracked under cross-examination, in defendants moments before their alibis fell apart. It was the look of someone calculating what they could get away with and how long they had left. Later that evening, when the crowd had begun to thin and the music had softened to background ambiance, Cain found himself alone at a high table with a glass of water and a growing storm in his chest. He needed to know more. He needed something real, something provable. But where could he start? The ceremony was done. The papers were signed. The photographs were already being edited for publication. If he was wrong, the damage would be unforgivable. But if he was right, he remembered their first meeting. It had been during the engagement dinner, a modest affair compared to today, but still refined. Ryan had been attentive and soft-spoken, telling stories about his time overseas, how he had served 2 tours and then pivoted into tech after getting out. Cain had listened politely, asked the kinds of questions one might expect from a curious elder, but the answers had been vague. Ryan couldn't or wouldn't name the unit he'd served in. He said his records were sealed due to sensitive missions. When pressed about his tech firm, he explained that he had silent partners and didn't want to bore anyone with startup jargon. Cain had let it slide. People had the right to privacy, especially veterans. But even then, the gears had started to turn. The judge now turned to a quiet corner of the lawn and pulled out his phone. His contacts were still full of names from his time on the bench. Investigators, prosecutors, even a few FBI field agents who owed him favors. He opened a message thread with a retired friend in the bureau. The man had always been thorough, discreet. Cain typed slowly, carefully. Need a favor, background check, name, Ryan Miller, claimed military, tech CEO, married Emma Carter today in Charleston. Just a gut feeling, but something feels wrong. He didn't expect a reply immediately. These things took time, but just sending the message made the knot in his chest ease slightly. Meanwhile, Emma was recounting the story of how she and Ryan had met to a small group of guests under one of the reception tents. Her voice was clear, melodic, the cadence of someone used to speaking in public. It was at a fundraiser for the Veterans Assistance Program last fall, she said, her eyes twinkling. I was given the keynote, and afterward, he came up to thank me for the speech. We started talking about nonprofit outreach for transitioning vets, and one thing led to another. Love at first sight, someone chimed in. Emma laughed. More like admiration at first sentence. But yes, everything moved quickly after that. Ryan nodded beside her. Some things you just know. The crowd melted at his words. Cain, within earshot, frowned. That was another thing. Ryan never spoke about where he came from. No family had attended the wedding on his side. When asked, he gave vague answers, parents deceased, siblings estranged, friends spread out. At first, Emma had found it noble. A man who had built himself from nothing, a self-made hero. But now, Cain saw it differently. It wasn't humility, it was erasure. A man who had no past was a man who could reinvent himself with ease. Back at his hotel that night, Cain couldn't sleep. He sat at the desk, poring over public records on his laptop. A quick search yielded dozens of Ryan Millers. Too common a name. No military honors, no startup founders that matched his face. No interviews, no LinkedIn, no press releases prior to the engagement announcement. That was odd. In an era where even high school sports trophies ended up online, how could a man with such a stellar resume have no digital footprint? Cain leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He was missing something. Or maybe Ryan Miller didn't exist. 3 days later, he received a message from his FBI contact. It was short, clinical, and enough to raise the hairs on his arms. Subject, Ryan Miller. No active military record, no VA benefits, no startup registrations under that name, no driver's license issued in the last decade under South Carolina or adjacent states. Possible alias. Will dig deeper. Advise caution. Cain stared at the screen, heart pounding. A possible alias. Then who the hell had Emma just married? The memory of the ceremony flooded back. Ryan's stillness, the delay in his smile, the way he looked at the door. That wasn't nervousness, it was strategy. Cain closed his laptop slowly. He had a choice now. He could go to the Carters and raise the alarm. He could involve law enforcement, try to undo what had already been set in motion, but without proof, solid, indisputable proof, it would be his word against a man who had so far fooled everyone. And so, he waited. He watched, and he listened. He knew the mask would slip eventually. It always did. What Cain didn't yet know was that the cracks were closer to the surface than he realized, and that the man calling himself Ryan Miller was holding together a lifetime of lies with trembling fingers and a ticking clock. The truth was coming, and it would not wait much longer. The days that followed the wedding settled into a deceptive calm. The headlines glowed with praise. The Carter wedding sets the bar for Southern elegance. Golden couple marries in historic ceremony. Emma Carter weds tech visionary. Photographs from the event adorned glossy magazines and trended on social media, where millions commented on the bride's gown, the setting, the floral arrangements, the kiss. None of them could have imagined the quiet undercurrent that pulsed beneath it all, a current that grew stronger with each hour that passed. Judge Albert Cain did not share in the celebration. While the rest of Charleston admired the wedding from afar or basked in the afterglow, he spent his time reviewing the report his FBI contact had sent him. Each rereading only deepened the frown etched across his brow. There was no question now, Ryan Miller was not real. The man who had stood beside Emma at the altar, whose hand had slipped a ring onto her finger, whose mouth had spoken vows of devotion, had no history, no documentation, no legal existence. Cain had handled cases like this before. He'd seen the damage a professional imposter could do, but never had one come so close to someone he cared about. Never had one succeeded this completely. He wrestled with the implications. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. If the man she married had used a false identity, their union might not even be legally binding. But to move forward with any sort of confrontation, Cain would need more than suspicion and a couple of missing documents. He would need proof, and that meant time. Time to probe, to ask, to watch. It also meant maintaining the delicate balance between vigilance and discretion, at least for now. Emma herself remained blissfully unaware. She and Ryan had retreated to a private estate outside Asheville for a brief honeymoon. Just a few days of quiet before they planned to embark on a European tour and return in time for Emma to resume her work with the Women's Initiative. She was happier than she had been in years. In photographs posted to a limited circle of friends, she wore no makeup and soft flannel, her face aglow with contentment. She looked like a woman who had found not just love, but peace. Ryan, for his part, kept the illusion intact. He cooked breakfast, brought her coffee, massaged her shoulders after long hikes through the woods. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. He listened with patience and responded with warmth. And yet, in the quiet hours when Emma wasn't watching, he would stand at the edge of the property and look out across the dark trees, checking his phone repeatedly, as if waiting for something, or someone. When they returned to Charleston, a welcome dinner was planned in their honor. Judge Cain was invited, of course, and though he considered declining, His instincts told him otherwise. This was the moment to observe, to act if necessary. The dinner took place in the Carter family estate, a sprawling Georgian mansion that sat on a hill overlooking the Ashley River. It was a warm evening, the breeze carrying the scent of gardenias and honeysuckle as guests sipped cocktails and swapped stories on the wide veranda. Cain arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting the lawn in golden light. He wore a crisp navy suit and carried his usual air of quiet authority. As he approached the house, he caught sight of Ryan standing near the edge of the veranda, speaking with one of Emma's cousins. He was smiling again, always smiling, but Cain saw through it now. That smile had a shelf life. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, the long table set with fine china and flickering candles. Conversation flowed easily. Emma laughed often, her hand resting lightly on Ryan's forearm. But Cain remained reserved, answering questions with courtesy but volunteering little. He watched. He listened. When the meal ended, Emma excused herself to take a call from one of her foundation's partners. Ryan lingered by the fireplace, refilling his glass of wine. Cain seized the moment and crossed the room. "You seem comfortable in your new role," Cain said, his tone conversational but firm. Ryan glanced up, no trace of unease in his expression. "Very much so. Emma's a remarkable woman. I'm lucky." "You are," Cain agreed. He let a pause hang between them. "Funny, though, I don't recall ever seeing your name in the military registers." Ryan's smile twitched barely. "I told you I was in a specialized unit. A lot of what we did isn't exactly public record. I've known many men in your position. They tend to carry that weight differently." "What do you mean?" Cain looked him dead in the eye. "They don't smile so easily." Ryan held his gaze. "Is there something you'd like to ask me directly, Judge?" Cain considered it. He thought of Emma's face that morning, bright, open, full of trust. He thought of the hundreds of guests, the applause, the vows, and then he stepped back. "Not tonight," he said, "but soon." Ryan didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away. The next morning, Cain made a decision. He scheduled a private meeting with Emma at her office. He knew confronting her would be difficult, but the window for protecting her was narrowing. When she arrived, she looked radiant, still carrying the joy of newlywed life. She hugged Cain warmly and poured them both coffee. "I'm glad you came by," she said. "We haven't really had time to catch up." "I'm glad too," he said, though his expression remained grave. She noticed. "Is everything all right?" Cain folded his hands on the table. "Emma, I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever looked into Ryan's background? Really looked?" She blinked. "I mean, we've talked, of course, about his childhood, his time in the military, his company. I'd like to give you a chance, Mr. Miller, to clear up a few inconsistencies in your background before we take further steps." Ryan's face didn't move. "Is this some kind of joke?" Cain's tone remained calm. "I wish it were." Emma took a step forward. "You told me your parents died when you were 16. "They did," he said quickly. "And you said you served in Afghanistan. Twice." He nodded. "Yes." "You said you grew up in Lake Haven, that your father was a mechanic." "All true," he replied. Cain placed one of the documents on the table before them. "There is no birth certificate for Ryan Miller born in Lake Haven, no military service under that name, no employment records, no academic records. The startup you say you co-founded has no registration with the state. There's no tax ID, no bank trail, no investor paperwork. The address you gave for your old apartment is a UPS mailbox." Ryan's smile faltered just slightly. Look, Judge, I don't know what kind of private investigator you hired, but this is a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Cain said. I know who you are, and I know you're not Ryan Miller. Silence filled the chamber like a wave crashing over stone. Emma's arms folded across her chest. Ryan looked between the two of them, a flicker of something sharp flashing through his eyes. You're wrong, he said at last, voice low. You think you know, but you don't. Then prove it, Cain said, stepping aside. Stand here, now. Say your real name. Tell her the truth. Ryan's eyes locked onto Emma's. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched. And then, like a switch flipping, his demeanor changed. He chuckled softly, ran a hand through his hair, and stepped back. Fine. You want the truth? You want a show? He looked around at the empty room, his voice growing louder. Let's give the judge his big moment. He took another step back as if ready to bolt, but the two plainclothes officers had already moved, subtly positioning themselves between him and the exits. He saw them and stopped. Cain spoke again. Your real name is Joel Stern, born in New Jersey. Arrested in 2012 and 2015 on charges of identity theft and wire fraud. You posted bail and disappeared. You resurfaced in Atlanta under the name Michael Travers. Another failed engagement. Another missing trust fund. And then you reappeared as Ryan Miller. You targeted Emma. You knew who she was before you ever met her. Emma's face remained composed, but her eyes brimmed with tears. She had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it, but still the finality of it hit like a cold wind. She had believed in love. She had believed in him, and now all that belief felt like a betrayal of herself. Ryan stared at her now, his posture slackening. I didn't plan it like this, he said. Not all of it. Which part did you plan? Emma asked, her voice quiet but steady. The lies? The wedding? The future you were going to steal? I didn't mean to fall for you, he said, the words rushing out. I thought I'd just play the part, get close, maybe. But you were different. You were kind. You listened. You looked at me like I mattered. You don't matter, she said, and the tremble in her voice did not come from sadness, but fury. Not as Ryan, not as Joel, not as whoever you are. Cain gestured subtly, and the two officers stepped forward. Ryan's eyes widened. No, he said, raising his hands. Wait. Just wait. I'll come clean. I'll explain everything. Just don't arrest me here. Not like this. Not in front of her. You made your choices, Cain said. Now face the consequences. The officers moved in, taking Ryan by the arms. He didn't resist. Not this time. His head hung low as they let him out, and he didn't look back. As the doors shut behind them, Emma remained still. Her shoulders rose and fell with each breath, and her hands, once tightly clasped, now hung at her sides, open and empty. Cain stepped closer. I'm sorry, he said, the words quiet, full of regret. You warned me, she replied, her voice distant. I just didn't want to believe it. You wanted to believe in love, he said. That's not a mistake. She finally turned to him, her eyes wet but clear. It feels like one. It isn't, he said. The mistake was his. They stood in silence for a long time. The room was quiet again, just as it had been before the wedding, before the lies, before the masks. Only now it held no illusions. Emma walked to the window and looked out over the city. The courthouse bell rang once, just once, and the sound lingered like a benediction. She didn't cry, not yet. That would come later. For now, she breathed. She was free. The city awoke the next morning to a storm of headlines. They spread across Charleston like wildfire, then leapt from local channels to national news. Bride exposes groom at the altar, read one banner in bold white letters across a crimson background. Southern heiress married a ghost, claimed another. Ceremony halted by judge. Wedding turns into arrest. Photographs of Emma, calm-faced and stoic beside Judge Cain, began circulating with feverish speed, while grainy footage of Ryan, or Joel, as the world now knew him, being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs played on every screen. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a spectacle. Talk shows dissected it. Twitter exploded with speculation. Strangers commented on Emma's courage, her poise, her heartbreak. Everyone had something to say, and almost none of them knew her at all. Inside the Carter home, the atmosphere was quieter, heavier. Emma sat alone in her bedroom, television muted, the curtains drawn. Her wedding dress had been packed away, boxed, and sealed like a relic of a life she never lived. The rings were gone, returned to their case, tucked into a drawer she had no intention of opening again. Outside her door, staff moved softly, avoiding eye contact. Her parents had offered to stay close, to talk, to bring tea or warmth or distractions, but she had declined. What she needed was silence, space, breath. She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, studying the face that had graced magazine covers and nonprofit campaigns. It looked different now, sharper somehow, not older but carved by something irreversible. A part of her had been scraped away, and in its place was something new. She didn't know what to call it yet. Strength, maybe, or just the beginning of it. Judge Cain arrived around noon. He didn't knock right away. He stood at the threshold of the house for a long minute, hat in hand, gaze lowered. When he finally entered, the butler gestured silently toward the study. Emma met him there, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, barefoot, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked at him without pretense, without barriers. "I didn't know if I should come," he said. "You should have," she replied. They sat across from each other, the silence between them not uncomfortable but necessary. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," Cain began. "Con men, thieves, people who live behind 10 masks stacked one on top of another. But I've never seen someone orchestrate a life like he did. He didn't just lie. He built a character. He rehearsed him. And he played that role better than some actors I've seen on stage." Emma didn't respond. She watched a small dust mote spin in the air, caught in a shaft of light. Cain sighed. "Do you want to hear the rest?" She nodded. He pulled a folder from his coat and laid it on the table between them. "His real name is Joel Thomas Stern, born in Newark, New Jersey. His father left when he was a toddler. His mother died when he was 11. He spent the next 7 years bouncing through foster care, juvie, shelters. He was smart, gifted, some reports say, but unstable. He started with credit card fraud at 17. Got caught forging transcripts for college admissions. Then came the big scams, multiple identities, multiple cities. Always the same pattern. Wealthy women, trust funds, elaborate stories. He would disappear once he was close to being caught. He knew how to vanish." Emma ran her fingers along the edge of the table. "Why me?" Cain hesitated. "He saw your name in a business magazine, a profile piece on your foundation. He targeted you deliberately. He studied your schedule, your work, your social media. He made sure you crossed paths. You never met him by chance, Emma. He orchestrated everything." She swallowed, but her voice remained even. "So it was all fake?" "No," Cain said, "the story was fake. The feelings, maybe not. That's harder to know. "I don't care," she said, "not anymore." Cain closed the folder. "He's being held without bail. Multiple states are preparing charges. He won't be getting out." Emma didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. The news felt cold, sterile. Justice, perhaps, but not comfort. She had already buried what needed to die. Outside the study, the sound of a phone ringing cut through the hush. Emma ignored it. She turned to the judge. "Will I ever stop feeling like a fool?" "No," he said softly, "but eventually you'll realize that you weren't foolish. You were human. You trusted. That's not weakness. That's grace." She didn't cry. She simply nodded. The following days passed in a blur. Interview requests poured in. Morning shows, magazines, documentary teams. Emma declined them all. She didn't want her pain sold or dissected. She wanted to protect what little of her life still felt like her own. But she didn't hide. She went back to work. She stood before boards and donors and community partners. Her voice, at first shaky, regained its strength. If people looked at her differently now, she ignored it. If they whispered, she didn't listen. She had been through the fire. Let them stare at the smoke, and then, slowly, the storm began to recede. The news cycle moved on. Another scandal, another face, another spectacle. People forgot, or pretended to, and Emma breathed again. It was late one night when she received the letter. There was no return address, no name, just her name, carefully written, and inside, a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was familiar. She had seen it on dozens of notes, cards, lists, but this time the words were not crafted to deceive. "Emma, there's nothing I can say to make this right. I could write about my childhood, my pain, my loneliness. I could tell you I meant it, that somewhere along the way the lie started to feel like the truth. But none of that would matter. Not now. You were kind to me when I didn't deserve it. You believed in me. And I used that belief like a weapon. I can't undo it. I can only say I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. There's a part of me that wishes I'd never met you. But a bigger part, the real part, knows that meeting you was the only honest thing that ever happened to me. Whatever future you build, I hope it's bright. I hope it's real. Joel." She read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the drawer. She didn't shred it, she didn't burn it, but she didn't reply. Instead, she went to the balcony. The night was clear, the stars scattered like spilled salt across the sky. She breathed in the air, cool, sharp, alive, and let the silence wrap around her like a second skin. She was no longer the girl who had walked down that aisle. She didn't know exactly who she was now, but she knew this. She would not be defined by someone else's deceit. She would not be reduced to a headline or a cautionary tale. She was Emma Carter, and she was still here. Spring settled over Charleston like a balm, coaxing color back into the trees and softness into the streets. The city, always proud of its elegance, seemed eager to return to normal, as if the chaos of winter, scandal, betrayal, whispered headlines, could be swept away by blooming azaleas and sweetgrass on the breeze. The Carter estate, too, began to breathe again. Though its halls had been the site of quiet grief and heavy silence, light returned gradually, not with fanfare but with quiet consistency. A door left open, fresh flowers on the table, a radio playing in the kitchen. The world had turned, and Emma Carter had turned with it. She was not the same woman she had been in lace and pearls, smiling beneath a cathedral veil. The change was not visible to most. She still carried herself with the same grace, still met others with warmth and poise. But there was a difference, an edge of resolve behind her gentleness, a clarity in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She had been through something most people only read about, and while it had shaken her, it had not broken her. In the weeks after Joel's arrest, Emma chose to re-enter her life slowly but deliberately. She resumed her leadership of the Women's Initiative Foundation, attending meetings, drafting proposals, and visiting shelters across the state. The foundation, already respected, now carried a renewed sense of urgency under her direction. Emma spoke less, but when she did, her words landed with more weight. Her pain had deepened her purpose. She understood, in a way she hadn't before, what it meant to be deceived, to have your trust weaponized. And she wanted no woman under her care to experience that without knowing there was someone who understood. She did not seek pity. When the media attempted to resurrect the story a month later, framing her as a symbol of modern female resilience, she declined all interview requests again. She had no desire to be elevated as an icon or held up as a victim. She was simply doing the work, quietly, steadily, with more fire than ever. Judge Cain kept his distance for a time, not out of coldness but respect. He had watched Emma emerge from the wreckage with awe, and though he checked in occasionally, he sensed she needed space to rebuild on her own terms. It wasn't until late May that she invited him to tea on the back porch of her family's home. The invitation came in a handwritten note, delivered by courier, simple and brief. "It's time." He arrived in his usual manner, punctual, neatly dressed, carrying a small gift box of lemon shortbread cookies from a local bakery he knew she liked. She greeted him with a warm but measured smile, and they sat beneath the shade of the wisteria vines as the sun filtered through the leaves. "I've been thinking," she said after they exchanged pleasantries, "about how many women fall for people like him. How many never get the chance to walk away." "You walked," Cain said gently, "and you walked strong. Because I had people behind me, because I had resources, influence, a judge who paid attention." She looked out at the river beyond the lawn. "Most women don't." He nodded. "You're right. I want to do something about that. Something bigger than a press release, bigger than a donation. I suspected you might." She smiled faintly. "I'm starting a new arm of the foundation. It's called the Light Project. Legal support, emergency housing, identity verification training, recovery counseling for women targeted by fraud, emotional, financial, romantic, for women like me, but without the safety net." Cain's smile was slow and proud. "That's the Emma I know. It's what I wish I'd had when I started to suspect something. A place to turn. Someone to say, 'You're not crazy. This doesn't feel right because it isn't.'" "You'll give that voice to others," Cain said, "and that matters more than anything." The Light Project launched quietly but with immediate impact. Within a month, it had received over 100 inquiries. Emma worked closely with a small team of attorneys, psychologists, and survivors. She hosted closed-door seminars in community centers, police departments, and college campuses. The message was clear and consistent. Deception thrives in silence. We fight it by speaking, by supporting, by shining light where there has only been shadow. Emma didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. A viral clip from one of her speaking events, where she gently told a room of college students that love without honesty is not love at all, was shared across platforms. It led to op-eds, think pieces, conversations across the country about digital romance, online manipulation, and emotional fraud. She was invited to Washington, D.C. to consult on a bill related to cyber-enabled relationship scams. For the first time, her pain had become policy. Still, she kept one part of her life private. She didn't date, not for a long while. Not because she feared love, but because she wanted to understand it better first. What it meant, what it required, how to protect the tender parts of herself without locking them away. And then, quietly, unexpectedly, something shifted. It was an ordinary Wednesday when she visited a local community hospital to deliver educational materials on digital safety. She wore jeans, a plain blouse, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She wasn't there for cameras or recognition, just boxes of printouts, pamphlets, and conversation. As she struggled to carry a stack through the lobby, a man stepped forward to help. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice low and calm. She looked up, startled by the softness of his tone. He was tall, with kind eyes and hands rough from work. His volunteer badge read Daniel. He wore scrubs and an easy smile, the kind not learned from charm school, but built through quiet practice. "Thanks," she said, shifting the weight into his arms. They walked together to the conference room. "You do this often?" he asked. "Sometimes, when I think it might matter." He nodded. "It does." They spoke for less than 10 minutes that day, just enough for her to notice that he didn't look at her with recognition or curiosity, only attention. He didn't ask about the headlines. He didn't mention the courthouse. He just asked what she believed in, and then he listened. She saw him again 2 weeks later at a health outreach event. This time he offered her coffee. Then they sat on a bench and talked for nearly an hour about books, siblings, the weather, and once again, not a single question about her past. She didn't fall, not quickly. She stepped carefully, slowly, letting her instincts lead her, letting herself believe that maybe, not all at once, but eventually, there could be something after broken trust, something simple, something true. She told Cain about Daniel one afternoon during another porch conversation. "He's quiet," she said, "kind, doesn't try too hard." Cain smiled. "The real ones never do." "I'm not rushing anything," she added, "but I don't flinch when he calls. That feels like a beginning." "It is," Cain said, "and you've earned it." Emma looked in the river, the way the light shimmered on its surface. "I used to think love had to feel like fireworks. Now, I think maybe it should feel like sunlight." "No noise," Cain said, "just warmth." She nodded, and in that moment, she understood. The wedding that had ended in scandal hadn't destroyed her. It had revealed her, not her weakness, but her resilience, not her naivety, but her clarity. She had walked through deception and come out not bitter, but better. She had not found a fairy tale. She had found the truth, and it was enough. By autumn, Charleston had begun to shift again, the sticky sweetness of summer giving way to cooler mornings, crisp air, and the faint rustle of falling leaves along cobblestone streets. The city wore the season well, its old oak trees shedding layers in quiet elegance, its historic buildings catching amber light just before dusk. The rhythm of life, so briefly unsettled by scandal and public fascination, had once more settled into a familiar, genteel cadence. But in the minds of many, something subtle had changed. Where once they had looked to Emma Carter as the daughter of a senator or the darling of Charleston society, now they looked to her with a different kind of reverence, one born not from prestige, but from endurance. Emma herself moved through the days with a sense of quiet purpose. The Light Project had grown faster than she anticipated. What began as a modest initiative under the Women's Initiative Foundation had, by early September, expanded into a regional network with branches opening in Columbia and Savannah. Each office was staffed with legal counselors, therapists, and digital forensics consultants trained to identify the signs of psychological and financial manipulation. Emma wasn't just the face of the work, she was its engine. She read every case file submitted in the early weeks, personally oversaw the intake process, and refused to delegate any responsibility that hadn't first passed through her own hands. This was no vanity cause. This was restitution. Her team had grown to admire her in a way that transcended admiration. They trusted her because she had earned it. She did not talk about Joel. She never referred to him by name. When cases crossed her desk that mirrored her own experience, she responded with compassion, never projection. She had healed enough to listen without reliving. That, perhaps, was her quietest triumph. And then came the invitation. It arrived in a thick white envelope embossed with a seal from the Department of Justice. Inside was a formal letter requesting her presence at a federal roundtable in Washington, D.C., a working session on romance-based fraud and emotional exploitation, with the aim of informing national legislative reform. Cain was the first person she told. They met, as they often did, on her family's back porch, sipping tea in the late afternoon light. Cain was slower these days, walking with a cane and letting his words come with more deliberation, but his mind remained as sharp as ever, and his pride in Emma had only grown deeper with time. "They want my opinion," she said, holding up the letter with a wry smile. "Funny, isn't it? A year ago I couldn't see through a lie. Now they want me to help write policy on it." Cain chuckled. "There's no better voice to speak on it." "I don't know," she said. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a policymaker." "You're something rarer," he replied. "You're someone who walked through the fire and chose to light the path for others. That's worth more than credentials." She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "I keep thinking about how close I came to giving him everything. My name, my trust, my future. But you didn't," he said. "You stepped back. You asked questions. You faced the truth when it hurt the most. That's what they need in those rooms, Emma. Not perfection. Integrity." She nodded slowly. "I'll go." Washington was different than Charleston. Louder, faster, more polished around the edges, but somehow less grounded. Emma arrived dressed simply, carrying only a leather folder and a firm sense of what she had to say. The round table included senators, federal investigators, cybersecurity analysts, and survivor advocates. Some spoke in statistics, some in personal stories. Emma did both. She described the psychological grooming, the way charisma could be used as camouflage, how easy it was to confuse control with care when it came wrapped in tenderness. She spoke plainly, without dramatics, and when she was done, the room was quiet. One of the committee members, a woman from the Office for Victim Services, leaned forward and said, "We need your help designing the framework for early education, not just prevention after the fact. What you just said, every girl needs to hear it before she ever downloads a dating app." That night, Emma sat in her hotel room watching the lights of the Capitol flicker through the window. She felt a kind of tiredness that wasn't exhaustion but fulfillment, the ache of having given something real. She thought of her younger self, standing at the altar, heart wide open, blind to the fault lines beneath her feet. That girl had not been foolish. She had been unprepared. Now she was not. Now she was ready. Daniel called that evening just to hear about her day. Their conversations had become a quiet thread through the months, never rushed, never forced. He didn't press, he didn't flatter. He just listened, then shared pieces of his own life in return. It was a rhythm Emma had come to value deeply. "Did you say everything you wanted to?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I said everything that mattered." When she returned to Charleston, the seasons had begun to shift again. The sky darkened earlier, the evenings grew cooler, and the city began its slow glide into winter. Emma took time for herself in the mornings, long walks, coffee on the porch, time with books. The Light Project was running smoothly now with a capable deputy in place. She no longer needed to carry every detail. She had built something that could stand on its own. Daniel invited her to visit his family's farm just outside Beaufort. It was modest, quiet, tucked into a stretch of land surrounded by woods and streams. She met his mother, a woman with strong arms and a warm laugh, and helped knead dough in a kitchen that smelled of sage and flour. They picked apples. They cooked over a wood stove. They sat in silence without discomfort. It wasn't a romance born of spark or spectacle. It was something else. Steadiness. Trust that had grown slowly, tested by time and quiet questions. For the first time in Emma's life, love didn't ask her to surrender anything. It asked her only to be. On a December afternoon, while walking along the Ashley River, Emma paused at the very spot where she and Joel had once posed for engagement photos. The light that day had been warm and golden, but she remembered feeling chilled. Something had felt off even then, but she had pushed it down, smiled for the camera, convinced herself that love was supposed to feel like nervousness. Now, standing in the same place with Daniel at her side, she felt none of that, just peace. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust. Later that night, she wrote a letter, not to Joel, not to Cain, to herself. You didn't fail. You grew. You didn't fall apart. You chose truth over illusion. You lost what wasn't real and found what was. You thought love had to be loud to be strong, but it doesn't. Sometimes it's the quiet that lasts. She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside Joel's. Two versions of the same past now resting beside each other, not in conflict, but in context. On New Year's Eve, she hosted a small gathering at the Carter estate. Nothing grand, just close friends, quiet music, and laughter that felt genuine. Cain was there, seated by the fire, nodding along to a story told by Daniel, who had become a gentle presence not just in Emma's life, but among her family. As the clock neared midnight, someone brought out champagne, and Emma stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching the people she loved fill the space with warmth. She wasn't the center of the story anymore. She didn't need to be. She stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool against her skin. The sky above was ink black, scattered with stars. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks would soon begin, but for now there was only stillness. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, not a wish, but a truth. I am whole. The new year began not with a bang, but with a breath. And Emma Carter stepped into it, not as a woman broken by betrayal, but as one rebuilt by truth. She did not look back. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more just like it. Check out the next video for another unforgettable twist, and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.